We are pulling apart the story of a cinematic landmark this time. A really intensive examination of the 1995 crime thriller, Seven.
Right. And this is a film that didn't just entertain. I mean, it
No.
fundamentally altered the landscape of the thriller genre.
It really did. It just dragged the neo-noir thriller into a level of darkness and uncompromising bleakness that very few films had dared to touch before.
It's absolutely a foundational piece of 90s cinema. Our source material today is really rich, compiling a comprehensive history of this film.
And it details everything.
Everything. The agonizing, difficult production process, the intense thematic structure built on sin and apathy, and of course the fierce battle that David Fincher and the cast fought to protect that notorious ending.
That's really our mission here, to synthesize these sources and truly understand how this specific dark vision, against some pretty significant studio resistance, managed to leave such an indelible mark.
And that's where the irony begins, isn't it? This film, which the studio predicted would alienate audiences because it was so bleak, became the seventh highest grossing film of 1995 worldwide.
The seventh, yeah. It pulled in over $327 million.
That staggering commercial success, it just speaks volumes about the power of an uncompromising artistic vision. And for the director, David Fincher, this was everything.
He'd been through a really difficult time on his first film.
A famously negative experience on his directorial debut, Alien 3, back in 1992. It was an experience he openly disowned. So Seven was his chance to reestablish himself, and he came to the project ready to fight, and fight intensely to maintain his creative control.
So you really can't understand the finished film without first understanding the war that was waged behind the scenes.
Not at all.
Now, before we jump into those battles and the plot, we do need to take a moment for a word of caution to you, the listener. The source material involves descriptions of violent crimes and a profoundly tragic event concerning one of the central characters.
That's right.
So, while we're focusing on the structural and thematic elements of the film, we will treat the segment involving Tracy Mills and her ultimate horrific fate with the sensitivity it absolutely deserves. This is a story about the presence of evil, and we will maintain appropriate respect as we examine the narrative forces at play.
Understood. So let's look at how this bleak world began.
The story begins not in Hollywood, but in a grimy New York apartment. Screenwriter Andrew Kevin Walker developed the spec script, titled simply Seven, around 1991.
And he was writing from personal experience. He'd moved from suburban Pennsylvania to New York City in 1986, right when crime and drug abuse were really surging. He describes his time there as deeply depressing.
And that environment directly fueled the city in the film, didn't it? That perpetually rainy, crime-ridden, unnamed, gloomy, and bleak landscape.
Absolutely. He was an aspiring writer looking to get noticed, and studios prized what they called a high-concept script, a simple, marketable idea.
And a thriller about a killer obsessed with the seven deadly sins.
It fit that initial bill perfectly.
But Walker's ambition was far beyond a standard thriller. He was determined to defy audience expectations.
He wanted the audience to leave the theater feeling absolutely violated and exhausted. That's a direct quote. He refused to provide the clean, satisfying resolution that Hollywood typically mandated.
So to achieve this, he engineered a truly radical narrative idea. The killer, John Doe, would surrender himself to the police well before the climax.
Which is brilliant, because it was specifically to rob the audience and the detectives of that cathartic final confrontation they were expecting.
Right, you don't get the big shootout.
No, Walker wanted the narrative to reflect real life. He argued that you rarely get the neat satisfaction of understanding the why behind evil. You just have to deal with the devastating aftermath.
So the initial interest came from an Italian company, Pentafilm, and Walker got the minimum fee, just enough to quit his job at Tower Records and focus on writing.
And that's when the predictable Hollywood machine kicked right in. Pentafilm, along with producer Arnold Kopelson and eventually New Line Cinema executives, they looked at that original ending and they just recoiled.
They hated it.
They immediately demanded a complete overhaul, pushing for a mainstream and optimistic outcome. They were terrified that the original dark conclusion would alienate test audiences, especially after the initial scores came back. Well, rather lukewarm.
The pressure on Walker must have been immense.
It was. Our sources indicate he wrote a punishing 13 drafts trying to satisfy their demands.
13?
Yes. In one of the major revised endings, the confrontation was set in a burning church. Detective Mills would be killed by John Doe, and Tracy, who was pregnant, would survive and leave the city alive.
A completely different movie.
Completely. Walker later confessed that he felt he was actively ruining his script during this period. He even considered walking away entirely.
So the survival of the film's core identity hinged entirely on David Fincher.
It did. And in a stroke of what you could call genuine movie magic, or maybe just a mistake by a junior executive, Fincher was mistakenly sent Walker's original script.
The one with the now famous head-in-the-box ending.
Exactly. And he was instantly captivated. He saw that ending as the necessary, uncompromising conclusion the story demanded.
And Fincher, still stinging from the lack of creative control he had on Alien 3,
famously joked that he would rather die of colon cancer than make another movie if he couldn't control the outcome.
So when he was presented with the newer, sanitized draft, he gave New Line Cinema an ultimatum.
He did. He said he would direct the film only if Walker's original brutal ending remained completely intact. No changes.
No, wait, wasn't that a massive risk for New Line Cinema? Why would they let a director who had publicly disowned his last major film dictate terms like that? Especially when those initial test scores were discouraging.
It's a great question, and it really comes down to a powerful internal ally. Michael DeLuca, who was the president of production at New Line Cinema at the time.
Yeah.
DeLuca also preferred the darker original version. So they made a mutual, calculated decision to push the film into production immediately within 6 weeks, using the original script.
They were trying to outrun the committee.
Deliberately moving fast, trying to avoid any further executive interference or a mandated pause that could lead to rewriting the ending.
And their resolve was totally cemented by the star power of Brad Pitt, who was cast as Detective David Mills.
Pitt was absolutely crucial. He agreed to join the project on the strict, non-negotiable condition that the head-in-the-box ending be retained.
And his insistence came from a recent negative experience, right?
That's right. The original ending of his previous film, Legends of the Fall, had been cut and changed because of negative test audience reactions. He was not going to let a studio sanitize another project he believed in.
And Pitt also contributed a subtle but critical detail to the finale. He insisted that Mills, the character driven by passion and temper, not by Somerset's cool intellect, must be the one to shoot and kill John Doe.
And that detail is vital because it fully completes Doe's plan. It cements the tragic arc.
So this full commitment from the stars and the director, this internal power block, it finally forced producer Arnold Kopelson to concede to Fincher's demands.
But Kopelson insisted on one major compromise. The horrifying contents of the package must never be explicitly shown on screen.
And that compromise, ironically, made the scene far more powerful.
So much more powerful. The implication, the shock reflected entirely on Somerset's face, was infinitely more haunting than any special effect could have been.
Walker himself believed that changing the dark tone of the ending would have just gutted the entire story, turning it into a generic crime procedural.
So the production battle wasn't just about a single scene. It was about maintaining the artistic integrity of the entire vision.
And Walker continued to refine the script even after they won that battle. He extended sequences like the chase scene where Mills pursues Doe.
And he wanted to avoid those typical frantic cinematic chases. He wrote that if he were in that situation, he would be highly wary to turn any corner, thinking about what might be waiting for him.
These small psychological details are what contributed to that unique, gritty, and paranoid atmosphere of the final film.
Okay, so let's walk through the plot that defines the structure. The setting is key. An unnamed city constantly ravaged by violent crime, pollution, and it's perpetually raining. This environment immediately sets the stage for our two protagonists.
First, we have Detective Lieutenant William Somerset, played by Morgan Freeman, disillusioned, meticulous, and just 1 week from retirement. He represents the analytical, experienced pessimist who has seen far too much.
And then there's Detective David Mills, played by Brad Pitt, young, idealistic, short-tempered, and recently transferred to the city with his wife, Tracy. He's the messy, inexperienced, but hopeful optimist, ready to fight the good fight.
The structure is built entirely on the 7 deadly sins. The investigation begins on a Monday with the first victim, gluttony.
This was a morbidly obese man found dead after being forced to eat far beyond his capacity until his stomach literally burst. The word gluttony is found written on the wall nearby.
Somerset immediately grasps the extreme, methodical nature of the killer. He recognizes this is way too much for his final week on the job.
So he tries to be reassigned, but his request is denied. Then on Tuesday, they find the second victim, greed.
This was a criminal defense attorney, Eli Gould, who was forced at gunpoint to cut a pound of flesh from his own body.
Clues discovered at that scene, namely library research notes on the 7 deadly sins for Somerset's hand. He realizes this is not random violence, it's a precisely orchestrated thematic narrative.
The meticulousness is just terrifying.
It is, and the pursuit leads them to the third victim, Sloth, Theodore Victor Allen. This scene is notoriously difficult to watch.
They find the victim, a drug-dealing pederast, emaciated and restrained to a bed, having been restrained and abused for exactly 1 year. The staging, the decay, the methodical starvation, it's pure psychological horror.
And here's where the commitment to atmosphere really shines through in the production details. The actor, Michael Reed McKay, was only 96 pounds.
This small.
And he had to endure up to 14 hours of detailed makeup and prosthetics application, including gelatin sores, pale white skin, and highly detailed veins to represent a year of decay.
Fincher also deliberately only told the SWAT team actors that they would find a corpse. So on the first take, when McKay had to slightly move his finger to show the victim was still alive.
The SWAT actors were genuinely shocked, which reinforces that feeling of finding something truly inhuman.
Moving into Friday, they find the lust victim. This is a sex worker who had been violently murdered by a man who had been held at gunpoint.
Yes, the source describes the horrific mechanism of the crime as involving a custom-made bladed device.
The following day, Saturday, the pride victim is discovered, a model named Rachel Slade whom Doe had facially disfigured. Unable to live without the beauty that defined her identity, she committed suicide.
Amidst all this methodical horror, the sources focus on one element that provides the only break in the oppressive tone. Tracy Mills, Mills's wife.
Played by Gwyneth Paltrow. She invites Somerset to dinner early on, which helps to break the tension between the two detectives.
But the crucial development happens on Friday when Tracy, feeling completely isolated with no other acquaintances in the city, meets privately with Somerset.
And she reveals her deep unhappiness with the move, the unsettling chaos of the city, and, most importantly, her secret pregnancy. She is deeply concerned that the city is an unfit place to raise a child.
This revelation creates a profound, immediate connection with Somerset.
Why?
Because Somerset admits his own painful history. He persuaded a former girlfriend to abort their child years earlier for similar reasons, and he has regretted it ever since.
So this shared vulnerability reinforces his motivation to protect Tracy.
Exactly. He advises her to inform Mills of the pregnancy only if she is absolutely certain she intends to keep the child, hoping to spare her and the unborn child from the destructive emotional influences of the city. He's essentially trying to save them both from his own past mistake.
The investigation finally clicks into high gear when a chance remark by Mills inspires Somerset to research libraries for anyone checking out books on the 7 deadly sins.
And this leads them directly to John Doe's apartment. They find a vast, chilling trove of evidence, a large cache of money, hundreds of meticulously detailed journals, and photographs of the victims.
And critically, they find photos of Somerset and Mills themselves.
Confirming Doe has been watching them, even from the Sloth crime scene where they thought the photographer was just an intrusive journalist.
The next day, Sunday, the film careens toward its devastating climax. John Doe, played by Kevin Spacey, arrives at the police station covered in blood and calmly surrenders.
He immediately threatens to plead insanity, which could mean he walks free, unless the two detectives agree to escort him to an undisclosed remote location for the final 2 victims.
During that tense drive, Doe reveals his disturbing motivation.
He believes God has chosen him to send a powerful message about the ubiquity of sin and society's total apathy toward it. He views his murders not as criminal acts, but as necessary sermons, designed to force society to pay attention.
Utterly without remorse, he challenges Mills, arguing that Mills is only outraged by the murders because they're grand, but that ordinary sin pervades the city to such an extent that innocence becomes trivial and tolerated.
The final sequence is just agonizingly drawn out as Doe leads them to this remote desert location far outside the city limits. A delivery van approaches, timed meticulously to arrive at 7:01 p.m. on Sunday, the 7th day of the week.
Somerset intercepts the package, which the driver was instructed to deliver directly to Mills.
And the horror is immediate and profound. Somerset opens the box and sees the contents, instantly collapsing, knowing what the implication must be.
Doe then reveals his role in the 7-sin masterpiece. He represents envy. He confesses that he envied Mills's ordinary, happy life with Tracy.
And then he delivers the devastating final blow to Mills, implying the box contains Tracy's severed head, revealing her pregnancy, and telling Mills that she begged for her life and the life of their unborn child.
The sheer emotional manipulation is unbearable to witness, and we must acknowledge the tragic reality of Tracy's fate here. the profound cruelty of her murder being used merely as a structural plot point by a self-appointed moral crusader.
Absolutely. And this is where the cycle is completed. Doe urges Mills to become the final sin, wrath, by shooting him dead in revenge.
Despite Somerset's desperate, frantic pleas to put his gun down.
Mills is completely distraught, just blinded by rage and grief over the catastrophic loss of his wife and unborn child. He shoots Doe dead, precisely completing the killer's terrifying, meticulous plan.
And Mills is immediately catatonic and arrested.
But the film's conclusion rests on Somerset. He decides not to retire, telling his captain he will be around. His closing voiceover is iconic.
Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.
That ambiguity Somerset, the pessimist, choosing to stay and fight despite the absolute proof of hopelessness he has just experienced, that is the crucial thematic anchor of the entire film.
As you noted, the plot is so meticulously engineered, but the film's lasting impact is intrinsically tied to its overwhelming atmosphere. Let's really get into how David Fincher and his production team crafted this sense of perpetual moral and physical decay.
The visual style was an intentional construction of anti-urbanism. Although the filming took place entirely in downtown Los Angeles, the city was meticulously stripped of any recognizable markers.
So no famous landmarks, no street signs.
No specific vehicles, no indication of time or place. This reinforced the idea that the city is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, trapped in a cycle of corruption, reflecting suburban fears about inner-city disorder.
And the atmosphere relies so heavily on the weather. The relentless rain wasn't a coincidence, but an artistic choice.
That's right. Rain fell frequently during the LA shoot, and Fincher chose to embrace it, making it an inescapable element. The perpetual downpour became a visual metaphor for sin permeating every possible crevice, a way to hide the typical Southern California sunshine and enhance the pervasive gloom.
The cinematographer, Darius Kanji, was central to achieving this specific visual language.
He cited the 1971 film Clute as a major influence, particularly its use of stark top light and widescreen compositions that achieved intimacy rather than vastness.
Kanji and Fincher chose to deliberately underexpose the film negative to achieve maximum contrast, creating exteriors that were intensely bright and interiors that were oppressively dark.
And they insisted on keeping those dailies dark, even when studio executives predictably complained.
To get that deep, black, stylized realism, they used an extremely specific and expensive chemical process called bleach bypass.
Right. You're essentially skipping a step in the photographic process, where the silver is normally removed from the film stock. By retaining that silver, the result is deep, rich blacks and a luminous, almost sickly effect in the lighter tones.
A process that, while costly and lengthy, contributed massively to the film's signature gritty look.
It was a production built on precise staging and realism. Fincher was meticulous, building sets without removable walls, forcing the camera and crew to work within tight, rigid confines to enhance the claustrophobia.
He also actively worked to counteract typical cinema tropes. He noted he hated films where characters claim visibility is low, but the audience can see everything clearly.
He wanted the audience to feel the same disorientation and fear as the characters.
And that commitment to realism extended to the practical effects, which were overseen by Rob Bottin.
Bottin studied real crime scene photographs, police evidence files, and even observed an autopsy to achieve the horrifying realism of the victims.
For the sloth victim, the set dressing had a grim reality that kind of blurred the line between the film's fictional decay and the reality of the chosen locations.
The crew actually had to clear real used condoms and crack pipes from the set location before they could replace them with staged props, a chilling testament to the raw urban decay they were capturing.
And we can't overlook the cost of commitment from Brad Pitt. He insisted on performing his own stunts during the chase scene involving Doe.
Right, he slipped on a rain-slick hood, crashed through a windshield, and sustained cut tendons and nerves in his left hand. Fincher recalled seeing exposed bone.
Pitt returned to set a few days later with a forearm cast, which Fincher then had to immediately write into later scenes.
Which meant that in earlier scenes in the film's timeline, Pitt had to keep his injured hand constantly in his pocket or obscured to maintain continuity.
Let's shift to the opening credits, which immediately established the tone and John Doe's meticulous, disturbed mind. The sequence, designed by Kyle Cooper and his team at RGA.
It was actually conceived as a temporary sequence for executives. It was created after Fincher's original planned opening. A scene of Somerset visiting a country home he intended to purchase for retirement was deemed too slow and removed.
Cooper's purpose was critical, to introduce Doe's perspective and the pervasive threat he represents before he appears in the final act.
Fincher famously gave Cooper the direction that he wanted the audience to run screaming from the theater during the titles.
The sequence focuses on Doe preparing for his crimes, cutting off his fingertips to hide prints, making tea, and most importantly, detailing his elaborate, meticulous journals.
And the sources indicate these journals were serious, expensive commitments to realism. They cost tens of thousands of dollars each to fill with text and unsettling images. About 6 complete massive journals were made.
The sequence dwells on Doe writing and crossing out words representing a perfect life, words like pregnancy and marriage, signaling his profound contempt for the happiness he believes society doesn't deserve.
And the title design itself was revolutionary. Cooper's team chose not to rely purely on digital effects, opting instead to physically assemble the sequence by hand.
They manually added scratches, tears, and pen marks directly onto the film negative.
Physically etching the text onto scratchboard and filming it over a light box to create that unsettling, jittery, disturbed hand aesthetic.
This innovative, raw style is widely credited as one of the most important design innovations of the 1990s. It triggered a genuine renaissance in title design across the industry.
Beyond the plot mechanics and the visual aesthetics, the true intellectual weight of Seven lies in its philosophical structure, centered on the dual sins of the plot and the societal sin of apathy.
Right. The indifference of the nameless city's inhabitants is the film's central problem.
And Somerset embodies this resignation. He is the professional pessimist who plans to retire because he genuinely does not believe the city can be saved.
He tells Mills that people are so indifferent that if they're in danger, they must be taught to yell fire rather than help, because people are only moved to action if they selfishly think they are personally in danger.
That moral decay, that sense of, it's not my problem, is what enables Doe's crimes.
This pervasive decay, symbolized by the endless rain, the distant sirens, and the screams heard through the windows, acts as a constant infection point.
And Tracy and Mills are presented as naive to this corruption. It's exemplified most vividly by their apartment constantly shaking from nearby elevated trains. It is a constant physical reminder of the city's unstable chaos that they try desperately to ignore and rise above.
The primary tension of the film is rooted in the paradox between the veteran detective and the killer.
Both Somerset and Doe perceive the exact same moral decay, the same ubiquity of sin in their city. Both are isolated, meticulous men devoted intensely to their work.
Somerset even attempts to create artificial order by using a ticking metronome to drown out the disordered noise of the sirens and screams outside his apartment.
But their responses are fundamentally different. Somerset has surrendered to despair and apathy, feeling the futility of his efforts and planning to leave. Doe, however, feels contempt and assumes the role of punisher,
rationalizing his acts as God-given sermons intended to force a response from society.
The critical distinction is that Somerset, while cynical, retains a glimmer of hope and has never taken a life. Doe is driven by the belief that humanity is irredeemable.
When Mills challenges Doe about the innocence of his victims, saying they were just ordinary people, Doe retorts that sin pervades the city to such an extent that innocence becomes trivial and tolerated.
He is saying that society is only concerned with the consequence of sin, the murder, not the existence of the sin itself, gluttony, greed, and so on.
Doe uses religious and literary frameworks to create a chilling intellectual order out of chaos, which contrasts sharply with the physical disorder he leaves behind.
Precisely. And Somerset, the intellectual of the pair, tries desperately to keep pace by consulting scholarly works.
He consults complex classic works like Chaucer's The Parson's Tale, which is about penance, and Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy,
which structures the circles of hell and the terraces of purgatory around the 7 deadly sins. The nameless city itself is often interpreted as an allegory for Dante's hell.
So Somerset uses this intellectual approach to try to anticipate the unpredictable, chaotic madness of Doe. The smashing of his metronome later on signifies his painful acknowledgement that the city's fundamental disorder cannot be boxed or timed.
And Mills is purposefully depicted as intellectually disadvantaged against Doe. He demonstrates only a rudimentary understanding of these complex cultural and religious themes, leaving him utterly vulnerable to Doe's psychological games.
Doe even stages his victims like art installations intended for observation, a concept that echoes philosopher Michel Foucault's concept of spectacular punishment.
Right, and we should probably define that for clarity. This concept of spectacular punishment suggests that the crime isn't just about retribution, but about a public theatrical display intended to shock society into submission or obedience.
So Doe uses this concept. His crimes are designed to be viewed, analyzed, and talked about by the masses. For example, he strategically hides a crucial clue at the Greed murder scene by turning a piece of art upside down, a detail only noticed by the well-read Somerset.
This connects directly to the culture of the serial killer. Doe functions as an aesthete killer, one who uses artistic methods in his murders, drawing comparisons to fictional killers like Hannibal Lecter.
Yet, the source notes that Doe does not come from high culture. He is self-taught, unemployed, and obsessively devoted to his mission.
And Mills, the young detective, dismisses Doe as a fleeting cultural phenomenon, calling him a movie of the week.
Which is deeply ironic because the film itself engages directly with, and arguably elevates, the cultural fascination with intelligent, resourceful serial killers. It gives the killer an intellectual framework that raises the stakes beyond simple pathology.
Finally, let's talk about the symbolism of the number 7 and the color palette. The number 7 is pervasive. The plan culminates on a Sunday, the seventh day of the week, and the biblical day of rest.
And the final package is delivered precisely at 7:01 p.m. It's a structure built on precise, chilling logic, leaving nothing to chance.
And the subtle color symbolism is fascinating. The source notes that red and green foreshadow the final two sins and the fates of the two main characters. Red, representing wrath, is associated with Somerset's lamp.
And green, representing envy, is associated with Mills's mug. This is an early subliminal warning of the roles they are about to be forced into.
It's also crucial to discuss the critical distinction in Doe's logic for the finale. He believes his plan requires his own death because he, too, is guilty of sin, the sin of envy toward Mills's life.
However, critics have suggested that Doe is actually the true sin of wrath, and his resigned acceptance of envy is only because he needed a sin to transfer to Mills.
Doe's final move, forcing Mills to kill him, demonstrates the infectiousness and pervasiveness of Finn, ensuring that even the relatively innocent Mills becomes guilty of the ultimate act of wrath.
The film's uncompromising bleakness was a huge commercial risk, but as we noted, it paid off massively. Critically, the film has only grown in stature over the decades.
It is now uniformly considered a groundbreaking thriller, a high point of 1990s filmmaking, and one of the most memorable thrillers of all time.
Its enduring appeal is tied directly to its intentional design choices. By deliberately avoiding excessive technological emphasis or too many pop culture references, the film avoids feeling dated.
The pervasive, timeless decay means the film still feels current, earning it a place on major film reference lists, including Roger Ebert's prestigious The Great Movies series.
And the film's success immediately and dramatically reshaped David Fincher's career, which had been tarnished by the failure of Alien 3.
Yes, Se7en revitalized him. It established Fincher as an iconoclastic Hollywood director who demanded creative control, leading directly to critically acclaimed works like The Game and Fight Club. He proved that his specific dark vision was commercially viable.
It was also a pivotal turning point for Brad Pitt, allowing him to transition from being primarily cast as a romantic lead based on his appearance to securing more serious, demanding, dramatic roles that required emotional depth and grit.
And the ripple effect on the genre was profound. Se7en's grim aesthetic, the perpetual rain, the claustrophobic interiors, the psychological intensity, and its focus on body horror imagery became massively influential.
Fincher was careful to make the violence psychologically intense by implying, rather than overtly showing, gore, focusing on the victim's staging and aftermath.
And this premise of disenchanted detectives pursuing criminals with highly specific thematic killing methods set a new standard.
We see that influence echoing through subsequent films like The Bone Collector and the incredibly successful Saw series, which overtly replicated the aesthetic of the killer staging elaborate art installations.
Even recently, the 2022 superhero film The Batman, cited Se7en, as a key visual and structural inspiration for his version of Gotham City and the Riddler's crimes.
The film also played a role in broadening the acceptance of non-mainstream music in film scores. The highly influential title sequence featured a remix of the Nine Inch Nails song Closer by Coyle and Danny Hyde,
bringing a dark, industrial, and unnerving soundscape into the mainstream blockbuster conversation.
But the film's single most iconic moment, the twist that permanently embedded itself in popular culture, is the finale.
The ending remains one of the most shocking plot twists in cinematic history. Pitt's line, "What's in the box?" has become famous, frequently used in popular culture and internet discussion.
Screenwriter Andrew Kevin Walker firmly credited that specific twist as one of the primary reasons for the film's success. It was daring and unforgettable.
And as we discussed, producer Copelson only allowed the ending to be retained on the condition that the severed head would not be shown. Fincher believed that the implication of Tracy's head in the box, coupled with Somerset's horrified reaction and Doe's chilling confession, made the scene far more effective and haunting than any special effect ever could.
He even recounted an encounter with a woman who was convinced she had seen the contents of the box, reinforcing the power of that implication on the audience's mind.
Given the film's success, naturally, the idea of a sequel arose. In 2002, a proposed sequel titled 8-8 was floated.
And it would have focused on Somerset, who, following the trauma of Se7en, would be pursuing a psychic serial killer, having developed similar psychic abilities himself.
That idea was swiftly and decisively abandoned. The original cast and crew, including Pitt and Fincher, expressed zero interest in returning and tarnishing the original work.
Fincher gave an infamous quote about the prospect, stating with absolute finality that he would be less interested in that than I would in having cigarettes put out in my eyes.
The script, which was a repurposed spec script called Solace, was eventually produced as a standalone thriller in 2015, which was both a critical and commercial failure. A testament to how you cannot recapture lightning in a bottle when the driving artistic integrity is absent.
So we've explored the intense creative integrity that shielded this dark masterpiece from a typical Hollywood conclusion. We have detailed the film's meticulous thematic architecture, which uses classic religious literature and philosophical ideas of apathy in order to justify its terrifying narrative.
And how its stark, unforgettable aesthetic defined the neo-noir thriller genre for decades to come. Se7en is fundamentally a film about moral choice and resolve when faced with overwhelming evil.
Right. The entire final act rests on John Doe forcing Somerset out of his chosen apathy and manipulating Mills into an act of wrath.
Exactly.
So the question we leave you with is this. If the purpose of that final devastating act was to break the cynical Somerset, to prove to him that the world is irredeemable and that sin is universally infectious, did the killer John Doe ultimately lose the battle for Somerset's soul?
That's a fascinating question.
The cynical, retiring voice of reason, the man who was leaving the city forever, is the one character who chooses to remain, choosing to fight for the world despite having just experienced its absolute worst proof of hopelessness. Where does true hope reside in a world Se7en believes is fundamentally broken? That is something worth contemplating.
Thanks for listening.